The Werewolf. Dense snow was falling over the lonely farmhouse in Blekinge's deep forest where a farmer lived with his family. The farm was located in a covered valley beside the sloping mountain range, whose ancient heights averted the cold northern winds. It was now the month of December. The storm rolled wildly around the house then. The day had just turned to dusk, and the farmer and his little household sat around the nice evening fire, when a wanderer entered in and asked for the sake of God's mercy, pleaded to receive shelter for the night. He shivered with the cold running through his limbs, and clamped his teeth so hard that it was almost impossible for him to speak at first.
I have walked all day, but no matter how I did it, I happened to get so lost in the forest, and have not seen a single person since early this morning, nor have I devoured anything, neither wet or dry.
He explained.
I tried to take a shortcut from the place where I had my accommodation last night, but then I got led astray in the woods, and I thought that I would have to make a night camp under some trees then, when I finally saw a light in the distance that led me here. Now I humbly ask for your permission to rest here overnight.
You're welcome, if you're an honest man.
The farmer replied.
Virtue and righteousness are always welcome under my roof. But tell me, where are you from?
I'm recently from Skåne, but I was born in Vestmanland, and have lived there for a long time. But due to the most horrific chain of events, I have lost everything I once owned.
What's your name?
My name is Johan Westerlund.
Do you have any skills?
Yes, I'm a tailor.
So you're a tailor?
The farmer exclaimed cheerfully.
Then you can stay here and work for me for at least a while. Christmas time is approaching, and it would be appropriate that we go get some new clothes to wear for the holidays. What do you say about it? Would you accept my offer?
I would be more than happy.
The tailor replied as he felt how the warmth began to thaw his stiff, frozen joints.
My greatest wish is to earn a living with the craft of my hands, but unfortunately I have too long lacked the opportunity to do so.
So the tailor stayed there at the farm, where he devoted himself with great diligence to his work, and he was very skillful too, which the mistress of the farm soon concluded. One evening when the farmer entered the cottage upon finishing his work, he said,
The wolves are howling like crazy in the woods tonight.
Really? Howling wolves? I wonder what they might have to say amongst themselves.
What do you mean?
The farmer wondered and looked suspicious of the tailor.
What do they have to say to each other? Do you think the wolves can speak?
Of course, all animals can make themselves understood to each other, though they do it in a way that people cannot comprehend. I really want to go out and listen to what they might say.
He did so when he came in again after an hour.
Well, my friend, what did the wolves have to say?
Well, they said they were going to eat your white horse for breakfast tomorrow morning.
My white horse for breakfast? Like hell they will.
The farmer cried resentfully. The tailor replied in a calm demeanor.
You'll see tomorrow.
The next morning, the farmer had more or less forgotten about the previous night's strange conversation, or at least he pretended to attach little importance to it because he probably viewed the tailor's assertion more like a bad joke. He led his white horse to the well as usual to have a drink. As he stood by the well, the horse was scared by something that he saw and tore himself away from the farmer. With lightning speed, the mare rushed into the woods, and then the farmer recalled what the tailor had said. Therefore he ran after the mare to catch her, but unfortunately he was too late. The wolves had already pounced on the poor horse and had soon ripped his trusty carrier to shreds, therefore fulfilling the tailor's prophecy. The farmer walked back down as he poured out profanities and curses upon the vile beast who had inflicted him with this great loss.
How do you know or really understand wolves howling?
He said to the tailor,
I have had plenty of time to study their language, and I cannot without tears in my eyes remind myself of the unfortunate period of time when I too had to make them company.
You mean you have lived with the wolves?
As surely as you see me and I see you, I have for 10 long years, for me longer than an eternity, been turned into a werewolf.
What do you mean?
Farmer felt surprised.
If you want, I could retell my unhappy life story.
The farmer nodded in agreement, and then Westland began to tell the story as it follows.
I had my childhood home in Vestmanland, where my parents had a small farmhouse by the lake, Elvlangen, southwest of the town of Norra. When I was 10 years old, my father put me in apprenticeship under a tailor in the town, and I had already achieved good skill in my craft by the time of my father's passing. That's when my mother wanted me to return home to take over the cottage and support her in her old age. Through such circumstances, I could not help but to say goodbye to my master and mistress and move home. By this time, I was a grown-up man and had for several years been in a relationship with one of my master's servants, my beloved Beata, and with her I now married. At the cottage we had some crop lodging, a cow and some sheep, and I also earned a bit extra since I got plenty of extra work from my sewing, because my former master often turned to me for help when he was overwhelmed with his own tasks. So we lived together for several years, in heartfelt love and harmony, happy and satisfied. But as everything on earth is perishable, my earthly serenity would soon also fly its way, never to return. One day, my mother died, and at the same time our only child, a 2-year-old girl, laid very sick. My wife was going into the city to buy medication for the girl, and at the same time buy some things for my mother's funeral. I was alone at home with our little girl, staying busy by sewing a suit. As I sat there and worked, I looked through the window where I suddenly saw a group of travelers ride by the house. An old lady was, as it seemed to me, the leader of the group, and this old witch soon came in and began to ask for everything she saw in the house in a most rude manner. She said,
"My good man, hand over some pork or meat for me and my children, and some cheese or butter that I can feed to my horse."
"I have nothing to give away," I answered.
"So you're a tailor. Good. Then you can make me a nice coat."
"I think you should work and support yourself as ordinary people do, not drag around from village to village and beg."
"What does our way of life concern you? What do you care whether we work or not? If you do not give us what we want, then I promise you one disaster after the next are going to befall you, and it won't leave you as long as you have a single crumb left to spare."
"You damned old witch," I responded with the anger boiling inside me. "You do not control anyone else's happiness or misfortune, do you? Throw yourself out the door, otherwise I'll throw you myself in a manner you'll never forget."
"You poor madman. The misfortune is already upon you. You will lose your cattle before the evening, and you will also lose yourself by becoming the monstrous beast you are inside. Rest assured, this is the end of the line for you."
"Shut up!" I shouted in full rage. "Stop it with your evil claims!" And so I took a big cudgel to push her over the threshold. But that same moment the old woman lifted her wand and hit me with it 3 times across the head as she exclaimed,
"I marked thee as the beast, a wolf among people now unleashed. After 10 years thee be released."
At the same moment I fell to the floor unconscious. As I woke up, it was night time. My clothes fell away from me like scales from a snake. My hands and feet were turned into long, hairy wolf legs. My mouth grew into a carnivore's jaw, and thick fur grew all across my body. The first thing I did in my unwanted, so cruelly forced wolf form was that I consumed my only child, after having torn her to pieces. After I had carried out this atrocity, as it happened against my will, but my new predatory nature did not hold anything sacred, I made a horrible and piercing howl towards the night sky before I hurried out and ripped apart my only cow as she stood alone and grazed in the meadow. I left for the forest and threw myself under a tree to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, I barely remembered what had happened. I knew that I could not return. No! And there was no one that I could tell of my troubles, the grief over what I had done, the deep concern over my beloved wife. No friends and acquaintances could ever get to know about these arrows that had left unimaginable wounds in my heart. When I finally stood up from this sleep, I wanted nothing more than to die. That's when I suddenly heard a little bird sing the most beautiful melody.
"Suffer patiently through the hour of the trial. Don't let the mist of hardship beguile. It be gone after a while. Stars sing from the sky. Mourn not, there's a long time you got, but time will pass, and after 10 years you will be free at last. Trust in heaven and you'll see them again.
Then I decided to learn a new way of life. As my house, I had the wild wastelands. As my roof, I had the branches of the trees. Eventually, I forgot to grieve and got used to my new way of life, and after a while I met a couple of friends of the kind I now belong to. We started to make our explorations together whenever it was possible, because predators can get what they can grab. Thus, some days we had to go without food entirely. This was the life I lived until the 10 long, heavy years had passed, and my curse was finally over. When this happened, I hurried towards my former home with a pounding heart. I longed to find out how my wife and child were doing, but when I eventually arrived at the place where I had spent so many happy and joyful times, I could not find the slightest trace of neither house nor home. Everything resembled a wasteland. I looked around feeling heartbroken. Where was all that I had hoped for 10 years to see again? I sat down, and in my bitter despair, I started crying loudly over my unfortunate fate. Just at that moment, one of my old friends happened to come by. He wondered who it was who might be crying, and when he realized that it was me, he immediately started running. "Wait! Wait! Do not leave! I must speak with you!" I called after him as he turned back slowly and reluctantly. He looked at me with fear in his eyes, and asked with a shaky voice,
Oh my god, are you Taylor? Westland's ghost? Or is it truly you, in the flesh?
"That's all me, my friend," I answered. "But tell me, what happened? Where is my home, my wife, and my child?"
You honestly think it's time to ask for your home, wife, and child now, after all these years?
I told him of my fate, and after he had heard my tale, he began to tell the truth with a mournful gaze.
When your wife came back from town that day so long ago, she found the house silent and empty, and your daughter was lying dead in her bed, having been mauled by some kind of animal, and your belongings were missing. The same animal had killed your only cow, and you were gone without a trace, left behind. What could your poor wife have done? I, who was your closest neighbor and friend, took her in, but her grief was so deep that after 2 years, it laid her in the grave. The few things that remained of your possessions after your wife's death, her relatives took care of. Then someone bought your cottage and moved it away from here.
By now, I felt completely devastated as it all came back to me, and I remembered what I had done. That very moment, I decided that I would as soon as possible put an end to my miserable life. I went for a while, wondering what kind of method could be the easiest and most merciful to use. After I made my decision, I took a rope under my arm and walked away to a tree in the woods to hang myself. So I had decided to leave this earthly life. While I best prepared my departure, a little bird came flying once again, just the same way it occurred 10 years earlier. It sat down above me and sang.
Watch the path you take, beware, be sure and throw away your snare. Don't choose death if you truly care. Do what's right and anticipate. Wander the world and meet your fate. The world is great and beyond it, your loved ones shall wait.
Yes, the world is great, I thought after hearing the little bird's evocative singing. And so I removed the noose and threw it away, after which I decided to throw my despair away for good. A ray of hope had been shone into my heart. I can still earn a living with my work. The world is great.
Thus, the tailor completed his dramatic life story, explaining since that day he walked around, struggling with various hardships and poverty. Many a time, from the depths of his heart, he had wished he could find a home where he could calmly and with perseverance spend the remaining days of his life without being a burden to others through begging.
Stay here.
The farmer had declared after listening to the poor man's tale with the greatest amazement.
Here with me you will now find shelter for the rest of your days. In this area there's a great demand for a skilled tailor, and I do not think you should run out of work. However, if it were to be that you can't find work, then you know that here with me you can always count on a place to live, where you may rest after your hardships.
I cannot find words for my gratitude.
The tailor answered, feeling deeply moved.
My wish is fulfilled. May the blessing of heaven never leave you or your descendants. Trust in the providence of God.
And after that, the tailor stayed with the farmer for the rest of his life, thus fulfilling his fate.